Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. Yes, you have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today. Got a very interesting program in store for you. You know, on this show, as you know, we love conversion stories. We learn a lot from hearing the story of people coming into the church. But what about the stories about people who are forsaking Christianity and forsaking theism? I guess you could call them deconversion stories. Can we learn anything from them? And what exactly can we learn? Well, there is a YouTube site that started very early on in the internet, extremely popular, called Ear Biscuit. And there's a deconversion story that's got a number of hits. It's Rhett's Spiritual Deconstruction. And today we're going to have Dr. Douglas Beaumont come on the show, and we're going to kind of analyze it, break it apart, look at it from different angles. I appreciated his presentation. It's actually he's very articulate. He's very clear on his story, and I think, it's a charitable presentation. So it's a very good subject to kind of look at from a Catholic perspective, because both gentlemen on the show are I don't know, how would you call it, have forsaken the Christian faith from Protestant Christianity. And their deconversion stories, I think, are worth looking at and analyzing, because there's a lot we can learn as Catholics when we're sharing, defending the faith, when we're teaching our faith to our children, what we can do to prevent things like this. So anyway, he's going to be coming up on the other side of the break, our good friend, Dr. Douglas Beaumont, which is always fun to have him on the show. He's a great guy, super, super smart. And himself, he's a convert from evangelical Protestantism. So that's in store for us on the other side of the break. But what about this side of the break? Well, we have our critical thinking skills exercise, which is our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's Finding the Fallacy, for you Latinists out there, it is argumentum ad populum, otherwise known as the appeal to the popular. And we also meet an early church father for today. Today's early church father is not actually an individual. It is a document, and actually a part of another document, which is also listed amongst the early church fathers, and it's known as the Apostolic Canons. So we're going to talk about the Apostolic Canons. We're going to talk about the appeal to the popular, and then the rest of the show we're going to be talking with our good friend Dr. Douglas Beaumont. But first, lest I forget, and God willing, I'll never forget, all you good people watching live stream, Facebook, YouTube, and all the other platforms that we stream live stream. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Great to see you in the gym. Yes. Hi, Beth. Hi, Hector. Hi, everyone. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the United States and listening via podcast around the world. And that is through our website, either through our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org, or a handy-dandy phone app, or both, or neither. I don't know. I guess you could probably get the podcast from like all sorts of distribution points. But anyway, we love having you on board and being part of our team. And being part of the team, we're doing apologetics in place during the COVID crisis. So please, on social media, spread the word about Hands-On Apologetics. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we'd really appreciate it if you could. And just tell people about the show. And that way we can share all this great information with other people and, live up to our call to evangelize the world. Even though we may not leave the comfort of our own homes. And that's the beautiful thing about social media. Let's see, if you have a question for Dr. Douglas Beaumont, you can give us a call toll-free at 888-526-2151. Or you can always send your emails to the Dojo mailbox, which is questions@handsonapologetics.com. And I do try to answer all emails, and not always timely, but I do try. So, by the way, if anybody has not received the reply to me and you did email, please send another one, because it's always possible that somehow or other they got lost in the shuffle, or maybe I just haven't gotten to it, and I'll put you at the top of the list. How about that? Okay, without further ado, why don't we learn informal fallacy, and we do that every episode on this show with the Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's fallacy is a popular one. It is the argument to the popular, or the argumentum ad populum. And you guys can probably guess from the title exactly what's involved with this fallacy. It's a fallacious argument that concludes that a position must be true because many or most people believe it, often concisely encapsulated as, if so many people believe so, it must be so. Okay. And that's the argument to the popular in a nutshell. I think this is probably the first type of fallacious argument kids employ. Everybody's doing it, so therefore it must be moral or it must be good. And of course, sometimes something could be popular and true, and sometimes things could be popular and false. You can't judge merely on its popularity. And again, I want to make a distinction here, because somebody could say, well, look, you appeal to the early church fathers all the time. So in a sense, you're kind of appealing to the popularity of a belief in the early church. Isn't that committing this fallacy of argumentum ad populum? And the answer is no, not at all. Because what we're doing is we're looking for a consensus in terms of witnesses or testimonies to a particular aspect of the faith in the early church. We're not just saying, wow, well, a lot of people in the ancient church believe this, so it must be true. That would be fallacious. But rather, if we could say, look, here are people who were in touch with apostolic teaching, who were leaders in the church, and they're instructing their faithful on particular points of view, then that points to a common point of origin earlier. In other words, it points to the original deposit of faith. So, important distinction, but, just keep that in mind. So if anybody ever appeals to the popular as being the sole reason why something is true, or I guess you could put something as moral, then they're committing the fallacy for today, which is the argumentum ad populum. All right, let's jump to meet an early church father. Like I said, he's not actually an individual person, but rather it is a document, and a document within a document. It's the Apostolic Canons, which was written sometime around 400 A.D. This work constitutes the 47th chapter of Book 8 of another apostolic father, well, not apostolic father, early church father known as the Apostolic Constitutions, which I believe will be the early church father for tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So it's actually, the 47th chapter of the 8th book. So it's this tiny little section at the end of Apostolic Constitutions is the so-called Apostolic Canons. Now, the Apostolic Constitutions are said to be written by Clement of Rome, but this is totally a spurious pseudepigraphic reference. It's not Clement of Rome. It's nowhere near that ancient. But he presents himself to be Clement of Rome writing this. So we call him Pseudo-Clement. So apparently Pseudo-Clement in the Apostolic Constitutions is responsible also for the collection known as the Apostolic Canons, which he compiled and appended to the formal work. Now, the Apostolic Canons deal mostly with ordination, duties, conduct of clergy, and in form they resemble conciliar canons of the period. In fact, the first 20 of the 85 apostolic canons are taken almost verbatim from the canons in the Council of Antioch, which met in 341. So, right there, a good portion of these apostolic canons actually come from an earlier local council. What's important, probably of all the canons in there, is Canon 85, which is actually very important for a field of study that I'm very interested in. Canon 85 of the Apostolic Constitutions is a list of canonical books of Scripture, and includes the Old Testament canon, and it also, by the way, some deuterocanonical books, but not all deuterocanonical books. And it mentions Maccabees and specifies 3 books. So this is one of the extremely rare, if not possibly the only instance in the early church where a list includes 3rd Maccabees. 3rd Maccabees, which some Orthodox churches accept as canonical. Most just accept it as a holy document. Of course, as Catholics, it's not part of our canon. Let's see. The New Testament canon, by the way, in the Apostolic canons omit Revelation, otherwise known as the Apocalypse, which is not surprising because apparently the Syrian canon in this period also had doubts about Revelation. The author of the work pretends that this list of canons, along with the constitutions, is an apostolic authority, and it was written down by Clement of Rome, like I mentioned earlier, who then sent it to all the bishops and priests around the world. So it's not surprising either that he insists that his New Testament canon, in his New Testament canon, that the letter of 1 Clement and 2 Clement, so-called, are also part of Scripture. So he has the audacity to, include these 2 letters from Clement as Scripture while pretending to be Clement. Not only that, but he also includes the constitutions themselves among the Scriptures as well. And that's our early church father for today, the Apostolic Canons. Coming up on the other side of the break, Dr. Douglas Beaumont. We're going to be talking about deconversion stories. Stay tuned, folks.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands on Apologetics. Well, as you know in the show, we love breaking down conversion stories because we learn a lot about how people view the church from outside, and we also learn, what are the strengths, what are the important aspects that attract people to the faith. Well, there is a flip side to this, and there is the deconversion story. And I think as Catholic apologists, we can learn a lot by looking at these as well in order to become better defenders of the faith. And to help us do that, we have our very good friend, Dr. Douglas Beaumont, with us. Dr. Beaumont received his Ph.D. in theology from Northwest University, M.A. in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. He's a convert to the faith and the author of the book Evangelical Exodus, Evangelical Seminarians and Their Path to Rome, as well as many other books. He's a popular speaker. He's a catechist. He's director of religious ed. And you could check out all the great stuff he does at douglasbeaumont.com. And Dr. Beaumont, welcome to Hands on Apologetics. Oh, I'm not hearing you on this end, Richard. Okay, I'm not. Okay, could you hear him?
No, I'm not hearing him at all.
Okay. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, folks. No. Okay. So, well, maybe.
You can call in 888-526.
Okay, we'll have to try Plan B then. Apparently, we're having some audio difficulties, folks. Sorry about that. But nevertheless, I could probably start setting up the topic of the program, and that is we're going to look at an incredibly popular channel on YouTube, which is called Ear Biscuit, and specifically a video of deconstruction spiritual story of Rhett. And I think it's a very good story, and it I think is done very charitably, and also very articulate. And so it's no surprise that this video has gained a lot of popularity out there in the blogosphere, out there in YouTube land. And so it's worth examining, at least from a Catholic perspective, as to what we can learn about how to defend the faith, maybe some failings on our part, and also look a little bit critical eye towards some of the things he brings up as well, whether his arguments hold water. So as we're trying to get our guest, Dr. Douglas Beaumont, on the phone, let's see. Yes, let me give you his website, Douglas Beaumont's website, which is very easy. It's his first name, last name, douglasbeaumont.com. And let's see. Also, as we're going to break this down, we were going to have some audio clips, folks, but unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. But it would have been nice to actually hear the stuff in context. But knowing Doug, he's going to be able to supply all the background info necessary. So deconversion stories are a fascinating subject because this is where they lay their cards on the table, and you can understand more clearly about what led them out of the faith. In fact, what led, in this particular instance, an evangelical Protestant, actually one who was involved in ministry, to give up his faith in Scripture and ultimately give up his faith in the existence of God, and also to forsake Jesus himself. So he doesn't get too much information in terms of the latter part, but he certainly does in terms of how certain things about biblical scholarship, and especially with Protestant apologetics, how they didn't help him in the search for truth. And Dr. Beaumont, are you there?
I am.
Okay. Hey, we made it. That's okay. Welcome aboard.
Yeah, sorry about that. I tested everything out on Skype before I got on, but it's not working. So
well,
we'll do it this way.
Fine. All right. Yeah, we'll just do it the old-fashioned way over phone. So I tried setting up the video a little bit. Perhaps you can fill us in about, what is this group? Who's this person? What's this deconstruction story, if you will?
Yeah, sure. So I'll be discussing Rhett and Link. That's the name of the show. That's kind of their brand. Basically, these are a couple of guys who got their start as Christian entertainers, kind of in the early days of the internet, in the 90s or so. And they kind of came up through Campus Crusade, and they started making videos for their church, started making goofy stuff for conferences and things like that. And they pretty much just kind of rode the wave, because as new social media platforms and especially YouTube opened up, they just kind of kept stepping up their game and stepping it up. And they got in at a perfect time, such that because their ministry, I mean, they didn't really have a ministry so much online as they did just an entertainment channel. And they put out some really hilarious stuff. And I do remember them. I don't currently follow them, and I haven't for ever really. But they've had some good stuff. They've been on a couple big time TV shows, so they really made it big. Millions and millions and millions of subscribers on their YouTube channel, multiple channels. Well, a couple of months ago, they came out with this series where they kind of came out of the Christian closet, if you will, and revealed to their listeners and subscribers their past, this number of years that they never really talked about on the show. I mean, these guys talk about everything. I mean, they got vasectomies together on video. Okay, so, these are guys that you kind of get the feeling you know everything about them, apparently, if you've been watching them. Well, they decided to go ahead and reveal their past as Christian missionaries, et cetera. And it turned out that was actually just the beginning of a whole series where they not only revealed their past, but they also explained that they were no longer Christians. And then each one of them took an hour and a half or so long show to explain why they were no longer Christians. And that's apparently caused a bit of a stir online. I actually heard about this from some colleagues of mine who did a response video to them. And I remember when I first saw it, I kind of laughed, and I thought, why are academics responding to these two clowns, and I say that with all respect. I mean, these are guys who cover themselves in chocolate and pretend to pee in each other's mouths. I mean, like, why are we,
yeah, right.
Why are we concerned? But they made a good point in this response video that, these guys have, I mean, I checked, just their channel, their main channel alone has almost 15 million subscribers. And because they came up in an era that they did, and because they never really put themselves out there as Christian entertainers, probably the majority of their viewers are not Christians. And Gary, as you and I both know, just from living in this world, most Christians are not apologists. They're not, typically terribly good at defending the faith. So you've got these two guys that are very likable, very popular, very intelligent, because they're both engineers by training, coming out and appearing to have these conversions, these deconversions, they call them deconstructions, out of the faith, because they have both discovered it to be false. I mean, in their view, Christianity is not true. And they're presenting this deconstruction, this autobiography of them leaving the faith, as if it's just their own stories. But as Rhett, especially Rhett, who kind of gives the more intellectual side of the story, points out numerous times, although they're not trying to be judgmental, this is an issue of truth for him. He is very much over and over talking about how he has always been skeptical. He has to prove things. So although they are very honestly, I think, telling their stories, at the same time, their stories are that they discovered Christianity isn't true. And they're telling this to millions of people who probably do not have the background training to really investigate. And if you kind of don't know a little bit more about the world of apologetics than most people do, and in fact, even more than apparently Rhett and Link do, they can sound very convincing, very well read, and their stuff is so popular that to suddenly drop this big deconversion into the middle of it is probably pretty earth-shaking for a number of people. And for the people who didn't probably really care that much in the first place about what their faith was, I fear that it could just serve as affirmation that Christianity is false and that these people made a good call by not being Christians.
Yeah, I agree. And, watching the video, I actually thought he did a standing job. He's very articulate. And the fact that he was looking for truth, I think, deserves some response, some help, because I think that's virtuous. People ought to be looking for truth. And, we believe he made some mistakes along the way, but still, I think that in and of itself deserves an intellectual response.
Absolutely. I mean, he mentions and by the way, for those listening, if you're not familiar with Rhett and Link, Rhett is one guy and Link is another guy. It's short for Lincoln. But when they did their deconstruction videos, Rhett went first, so he was really the first one to kind of let the cat out of the bag. Link went second in the next video that dropped after that, and Rhett really presented the more intellectual side. Link's story is much more experiential. It's a lot more subjective. I didn't like this, I didn't like that, so now I'm not a Christian. Whereas Rhett, in his presentation at least, comes across as much more objective. I had this problem, and then it was resolved, and then I had this problem, and then it was resolved. And so he kind of takes you step by step. Now, of course, these guys are like uber best friends. I think now I've been researching them, I'm learning some more stuff about them. Apparently they met in first grade. So these guys have pretty much lived their entire lives together, both literally and figuratively. So I'm sure that Link's conversion had a lot to do with Rhett's studies. He just doesn't really tell that side of the story. So if sometimes I'm talking about Rhett and Link and sometimes I'm just talking about one guy, I'm talking about Rhett. Okay. Just because his presentation is the one that dealt more with facts.
Okay. Yeah, we only have a minute. Maybe real quick, what were their backgrounds before they left Christianity and theism?
Yeah, this is really important to the whole discussion. Both of them were what I would call fundamentalists. Now, they consider themselves evangelical, and they went to a Baptist church. Now, in North Carolina, where they grew up and where I lived for 15 years, I can tell you that fundamentalist, evangelical, and Baptist often go together. You have to dig a little deeper. Evangelical has a very wide range of meanings. It can include groups that most people wouldn't even consider Christian, all the way down to really hardcore, fundamentalists. They are definitely way on the fundamentalist side of the spectrum.
Okay. Yeah, very good. All right, we're chatting with Dr. Douglas Beaumont, kind of exploring a deconversion story. Stay tuned. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. It's www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR. Live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin's Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Dr. Douglas Beaumont, and we're referring to a deconversion story that was given by Rhett of Rhett and Link's YouTube. And Dr. Beaumont, yeah, I got the same feeling, too, that they're really more from fundamentalist Protestantism rather than evangelical. And, of course, fundamentalists are a much, much smaller minority, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
If you're kind of unfamiliar with the Christian landscape, especially in America, I think it's easy to identify Christianity with the more fundamentalist strains of it because they're typically a lot louder.
Yeah.
They typically get more press. And, if you're in the South and, you just meet your average everyday Christian out there, most of them are probably Baptist. Most of them are probably the sorts of Baptists that Rhett and Link grew up in. And so it can definitely have the feel that this just is Christianity. But when we look at Christianity historically, when we look at it globally, the fundamentalist movement is very new on the scene, number one. I mean, we're talking generations, like people alive today were, pretty much the ones that started it. And it very much remains in the minority, depending on how big you draw your circle, of course. But just the very fact that Catholics and Orthodox and, let's just say standard Protestants vastly outnumber your Baptist evangelical groups, that alone is just objectively, skews the numbers in that way. And then, of course, historically, there's absolutely no question because fundamentalists didn't even really exist until the, maybe late 19th century at the earliest, and really didn't gain much purchase until the earlier parts of the 20th century. So,
yeah. The reason I bring that up is just because it's for Catholics who aren't familiar with it. Their views wouldn't necessarily correspond to the majority of non-Catholics, of Protestants.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the reasons that started his doubt about Christianity?
Yeah, so I think, he was on for over an hour and a half, and he's condensing years and years of study down. But at the same time, he also says several times in the beginning of his talk that he's going to give a lot of details, a very detailed talk. And indeed, he cites numerous sources. So he does take a pretty deep dive when he wants to. So I think that there is, even though I'm only giving a summary, I am giving a summary of something that has a lot of details. And if you go to my website, I have actually links to every single source that he cites, and you can really dig down if you are interested.
Excellent.
But I kind of break it into maybe like three major steps. And the step one was his difficulty with the Old Testament because of two related things, evolution and old earth. And so for those that are not maybe familiar with these terms, from the fundamentalist side of Christianity, there is a very strong rejection of the theory of evolution. And hand in hand with that is also the belief in what is called a young earth as opposed to an old earth. And the young earth view is that Genesis is absolutely literal, and when time statements are given, those are to be taken in the normal way that we would today. So if God says he created in 6 days, that means 6 24-hour days. And that is how long it took God to make the universe. And then if you kind of add up the generations and do some math, it looks like the world must have been created no more than about 10,000 years ago. Some would say 6,000. So, literally everything came into existence 6 to 10,000 years ago. So obviously there's no time for evolution. Now then there are also people that are okay with the old earth. And this gets you pretty much outside of fundamentalism, but even those that are kind of on the edge, old earth is typically the first thing they'll accept. They'll agree with science, Big Bang cosmology, 6 trillion, whatever years old it is. But they'll still reject evolution very strongly because that takes the creative power out of God and puts it in nature. And so Rhett's issue was that he started studying evolution. I don't recall him saying why, but he did. And that, plus studying the science behind young Earth and old Earth, convinced him that what he had been taught his whole life was not true, that evolution was true, that the old Earth was true. Interestingly, he only records himself reading Christians at this point. So he's reading people like Hugh Ross, who is an old Earth scientist, and he's kind of pitting him against, say, Ken Ham, who is the guy behind Answers in Genesis. And so he's reading Christians who accept evolution, like Francis Collins. He's reading Christians that believe in an old Earth. And yet his conclusion is, well, I'm going to reject Genesis and therefore the Old Testament, which seems like kind of a weird move, to be convinced by Christians who believe in Genesis that Genesis isn't true. But, of course, there's a bit more to it. But I think the real takeaway from this portion of his story is not so much this kind of odd move. It's the fact that for him, Genesis and young Earth and being anti-evolution were all equal. They were equatable. For him, to accept evolution and still believe in Genesis is really just kind of a workaround. It's almost disingenuous. For him, the walls came tumbling down. And not only did he think that Genesis was no longer true, but it gave him a real problem with the whole enterprise of Christian apologetics, which he says specifically that, he felt like he had been lied to. He felt like he had been told that there's no good evidence for evolution, and there was. And he spends quite a bit of time going into that, chromosome 2 and telomeres and this and that and this and that. And so really what this segment of his story really reflects is more his disillusionment with just the whole program of Christian apologetics, because in his mind, these guys that he had trusted all his life so far have turned out to be faulty. They are saying that there's no evidence for things that there is evidence for, that there's good evidence for. And so he kind of loses his faith in the Old Testament and in Christian apologetics together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I found it interesting. He kind of bifurcates between his faith and these apologists, where he would say he would believe stuff, and then when he's challenged and start doubting, he'd run to the apologist to get answers. And then once the apologist he kind of gave up on, then that kind of crumbled his faith.
Yeah, because where else are you going to go, right? And he sprinkles this throughout the talk, but it's pretty clear that he's had issues with certain parts of Christianity for a long time. Rhett and Link are both very clear that they've got moral issues with Christianity, specifically with some of the Old Testament stuff, with the church hierarchy and how where women can fit in, gay marriage. They already had some issues. Rhett was questioning the resurrection. Rhett was questioning the very canon of Scripture, something I can resonate with. So it's not like they just kind of came into this whole thing, wide-eyed innocence, that were just shocked that there was any, question about Christianity whatsoever. They had both entertained doubts for quite some time. It's just that for whatever reason, and I don't want to try to psychologize these guys, the fact that a lot of this broke after they had moved from North Carolina in the Bible Belt to Los Angeles, started making millions of dollars. You know, I mean, like, it's kind of, a lot of people have just written them off. Well, it's just the age-old story, right? You get with a bunch of liberals, you make a bunch of money, you don't need Jesus anymore, and now he's inconvenient. I mean, it would be very easy to just, you know, sweep these guys under the rug. However, you know, having come from a conversion type situation myself and having experienced a lot of this brush off kind of thing, you know, I don't want to do that to them. I'm going to take their word. You know, everything that I am saying about them is from their mouths. So the kind of step one for Rhett was rejection of Genesis because of evolution and old earth, which kind of very easily and quickly led into dispensing with the entire Old Testament. And moreover, I think most importantly, he grew disillusioned with the project of Christian apologetics.
Boy, there's so much to drill down in this. And I think he was a careful thinker. He realized that he was looking for Old Testament evidence for, archaeological evidence for the Old Testament, and realized that there were gaps, you know, and so therefore he says, you know, he can't use gaps as evidence for or against. But nevertheless, you know, I think he already had made his decision to be skeptical, and that was enough for him to dismiss the whole Old Testament. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, he says that. He specifically says, you know, like, I know you can't take, you know, lack of evidence as evidence against. But again, I think that where he got into my head a bit was when he said, the problem is I had always heard that there was archaeological evidence, you know, for everything, and that the Bible always wins. Yeah. Well, what's funny is that nothing he said overturns that. I mean, the stories he heard are true. Numerous people have tried to disprove Christianity archaeologically and ended up failing and becoming Christians themselves. That's not the same claim, though, that every single thing in the Bible has archaeological evidence. What we're saying is when there is evidence, it is in favor of Scripture. So he kind of just throws that out there, but he never really completes the thought. And so, again, he makes it look like there's a serious problem archaeologically that the apologists out there that he read were dishonest about. It's like, no, everything you said is exactly what apologists say.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, like you say, though, I think at that point it was like, oh, here's my chance to not have to believe in a God who commanded, you know, the Israelites to go to war with the Canaanites. You know, here's my chance to not have to feel stupid for not believing in evolution, not believing in the Big Bang. I'm going to take that chance. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Again, not to psychologize, it makes sense from his point of view that he would do that.
Yeah, very good. We're chatting with Dr. Douglas Beaumont about Rhett's deconstruction story. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics. Stay tuned.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, you know, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and you know, I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show in the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
In Luke 7, Jesus said, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, because she has been shown great love. According to St. John of the Cross, Christians should always remember that the value of their good works is not based on number and excellence. Their value is based on the love for God that prompts them to do the works. May we always be motivated by true love for God, and not worry so much about what we do, but why we do it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. And we're chatting with Dr. Douglas Beaumont about Rhett's of Rhett and Link YouTube channel, Rhett's deconstruction of his faith. And Dr. Beaumont, yeah, it seems like it's a row of dominoes. You know, first it starts with young Earth versus old Earth. Once he realized science is on the old Earth, then he looks at evolution, Adam and Eve. That falls, which leads him to look critically at the Old Testament for substantiation. And you made a really good point that, you know, yeah, not everything may be substantiated in archaeology, but that doesn't mean the stuff that can be substantiated, you know, is nothing, you know, that they're just making things up.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, there's a bit of I think, you know, possibly a misunderstanding there, but
yeah.
You know, so what's interesting, excuse me, it's not COVID, I promise. What's interesting is that, you know, he devotes quite a bit of time to, I mean, like the show's like half over by the time you get to this point, which is interesting because, you know, for the vast majority of Christians throughout time who either didn't really take much of a position one way or the other on the age of the earth, I mean, we can go all the way back to St. Augustine, who said, you know, people disagree on whether Genesis is literal or not. You still haven't even really hit anything that really touches on Christianity. Now, at this point, he might have had a really good reason to not be fundamentalist anymore. But that's like, okay, you know, well, that, you know, to me, that's almost like a Mormon saying, hey, I discovered Joseph Smith is a false prophet, so I'm going to become an atheist. Like, well, hold on. You know, there's a lot of other places to go. You know? So, you know, he turns to the New Testament then. He says, okay, but, you know, even with all this, I still had Jesus. Well, then, in like a period of just a few minutes, he just flies through his skepticism of the New Testament and concludes that he thinks that a lot of it's made up. Now, he cites Bart Ehrman, okay, who's, you know, the modern-day New Testament skeptic par excellence. So that's respectable, Bart Ehrman. But what's sad is that he responds to what he read from Bart Ehrman by saying, now, I had read Josh McDowell, and I read Lee Strobel. And then he basically just says, and I concluded that the New Testament's, you know, pretty much made up. And then he moves on to the next thing. So several things to note here for those who are not, like, in apologetic circles. Number one, it isn't until this point that he even talks about anything that really actually is important for the Christian faith. Okay, he's talked about things that fundamentalists have an issue with, but by and large, Christians don't really have a big deal problem with evolution or old Earth. I mean, there's more nuanced views, but in general, this is not an issue. So when he finally gets around to Jesus and the resurrection, he almost hand waves it away with no arguments whatsoever. He just says, well, I read Bart Ehrman, and I found him convincing, and I read Lee Strobel and Josh McDowell, and they didn't, you know, they didn't stand up. Well, for those who don't know who these guys are, Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel are both very popular apologists in the Christian world, especially among evangelicals. But neither one of them are scholars by any means. They are not academics. They're not scholars. They are nowhere near the level of Dr. Bart Ehrman.
Right.
So it's kind of like he's saying, well, I had a choice between Taekwondo. We'll do a dojo analogy, Gary. It's kind of like saying,
Love it.
I had a choice between Taekwondo and karate, and I took this black belt in Taekwondo and put him up against a yellow belt in karate, and the Taekwondo guy, mopped the floor with him. So obviously Taekwondo wins.
Yeah.
So this tells me a couple things. Number one, you haven't really done your due diligence, okay? Because if you're going to throw around Bart Ehrman, then you need to throw around Michael Licona. You need to throw around N.T. Wright. You need to throw around Gary Habermas. You need to throw around people who are the academic equal of Bart Ehrman before I'm going to be impressed with your research.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I've got a book by Mike Licona and another one by N.T. Wright just on the resurrection of Jesus. And those two books barely fit in my hand. Okay, they're 700 or 800 pages long each.
Yeah.
Bart Ehrman puts out books that you can get at Walmart because he's writing at a popular level, but he's an academic.
Yes.
Lee Strobel and Josh McDowell write at a popular level, but they're kind of tapped out at that point. Like they don't have anywhere to go. So this is a very unfair comparison, and the fact that Rhett seems to think that he has done his due diligence by reading these popularizers tells me he didn't really do the work. And especially in like the most critical area of this whole entire thing, this is where he drops the ball. And again, I think it goes back to the fact that he is equating his fundamentalist upbringing with Christianity as a whole. And then when popular apologists can't stand up to scholarly skeptics, he feels totally justified in walking away from the faith. And I think both of those are huge missteps.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting in that group. I mean, Josh McDowell is a fundamentalist, or was, God rest his soul. Then you have Lee Strobel. Pardon? Oh, Lee Strobel. Yeah, Lee Strobel is a journalist who
That's right.
interviewed people. And then Bart Ehrman was a former, I think it was more of a fundamentalist who, his work in critical textual criticism undermined his fundamentalist faith. So it's not surprising he kind of, looks at Ehrman as kind of a fellow, companion on this journey out of the faith.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, Bart Ehrman went to Moody Bible Institute. I mean, for heaven's sake, you don't get much more fundamentalist than that. And he's been called out on this. I mean, Michael Licona is a friend of mine, and he's a friend of Bart Ehrman. I mean, they've been on the debate circuit for years. Like, it's inconceivable that anybody who is familiar with Bart Ehrman doesn't also know who Michael Licona is. And he gets called out on this a lot because Michael Licona is an evangelical, but he is not a fundamentalist. And many times he'll point this out, that, like, look, what Bart Ehrman is saying only really should call into question a certain way of reading the Bible, but it's not the only way, and it's not the most, it's not the majority way, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just hugely problematic for someone to say, hey, look, I've read the books, man, and come across like someone who's really done their homework, and basically what you've read is, blog level writing from the Christian side and academic level writing from the skeptical side.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so, and it's surprising because that is so important, like you said. It's really the core of Christianity, and unfortunately he only dedicated a few moments. But, I guess we could cut him some slack because it is a long video, but still you would think that would be something that you would want to focus a lot of attention on because it's so pivotal.
Well, that's the key, Gary, is that, he took notes. And this is interesting because Rhett and Link don't go off notes. They sit down in front of a microphone, they hit record, and whatever happens, happens. So for Rhett to come out, have a big stack of notes, tell everybody, I'm going to be detailed, I'm going to be detailed, I'm going to be detailed, and then talk about chromosome 2, talk about telomeres, talk about retroviruses, talk about vestigial organs. I mean, he goes on, he had a plan.
Yeah, right.
He knew the arguments that he was going to present. And he doesn't give any arguments against the resurrection. He doesn't give any arguments against the trustworthiness of the Gospels. Now, maybe he could. Again, like you say, maybe he looked at the clock and went, oh, man, I took up all my time with evolution, and now I got to blast through the New Testament part. That's fine. But that was a mistake of planning at the very least. You know, like you majored on the minors and minored on the majors, and that is in itself is a big problem. But here's the thing too, is that it doesn't take any longer to say Mike Licona than it does to say Josh McDowell. It doesn't take any longer to say N.T. Wright than to say Lee Strobel. So if he had read those sources, he's smart enough to know these are the guys to quote, not Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel, and he didn't do it. So I kind of got to believe that he just never read them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Very good point. So then he finishes off on moral issues.
Yeah, so, I mean, we kind of sketched this out a little bit earlier, but, you know, both of them point out over and over again, and if you watch their interviews with other people, like on other people's shows, they even open up even more. I think they're still kind of sensitive to their Christian audience on their show. But they blast the church for its view on homosexuality. I mean, they literally are just like, hey, you know what, in 100 years, no church on earth is going to have this view of homosexuality. I mean, it's the 21st century, guys. I mean, they're very just dismissive, and, you know, they take the fact that they are for gay marriage as an indication that their morality had not been affected by becoming skeptics. I mean, they actually use it as an argument. Yeah, see, we're still good guys. So in a weird sort of way, it's like on the moral side, they're very liberal. I mean, they're way out there. They're very much Hollywood Christians. But they're pitting that against a fundamentalist background, which not only correctly has those moral standards, but also has very good reasons for those moral standards that they no longer accept, because as fundamentalists, they're going to limit their morality to what the Bible teaches, right? They don't have a natural law tradition like the Catholic Church does. So again, for them, once you've walked away from the Bible, there's basically nothing left except just whatever morality you happen to hold. And so they're basically pitting biblical Christianity that truly is rooted in a philosophical natural law tradition, and they're just saying, well, they don't agree with us, so that's just one more reason not to be that way.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah. So you've written on critiquing this, the deconversion story.
Yeah, I've actually recorded a video on it for a channel on YouTube that's coming out pretty soon. And then I've also written a 3-part series on my DouglasBeaumont.com. If you just go there, you can see it. But yeah, I basically lay out like who these guys are, what the situation is. Part 2 is their claims, and then Part 3 is my response. And then I think it's in Part 3 you can actually get all the resources on both sides that are mentioned, as well as ones that I think you should read.
Yeah, very good. In the remaining part of the show, I'd like to find out what's going on with Dr. Beaumont, especially in light of, the COVID lockdown type stuff. Obviously, you've been busy writing. What other projects do you have going on?
Yeah, there's some stuff going on. I have a book coming out, hopefully fairly soon, from Catholic Answers called what do we decide to call it? We just changed it. With
happens.
One Accord. Yeah, that's it. So far, the title is With One Accord, and it's basically a book teaching Catholics how to explain their faith to Protestants using principles that they already agree with.
Very good. Well, that sounds like important work. We'll have to talk about that next time.
Look forward to it. That'd be great.
All right. Well, thank you, Doug, for coming on the show. That's Dr. Douglas Beaumont. You can check out his stuff at DouglasBeaumont.com. And it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo light. Thank you so much for listening. And God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing called Hands on Apologetics. But first, we have the Terry and Jesse Show coming up. High Impact Catholic Talk. Don't want to miss it. Have a great day. God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.